"What are you even doing near that car? Step away." The manager's voice cut through the air like a blade. Without waiting for a response, he slammed the door of the Rolls-Royce Ghost so hard that a nearby espresso cup jolted off the console and spilled down the shoulder of the man standing beside it. Hot, bitter liquid splashed across his neatly pressed gray shirt. A sharp gasp rippled through the customer lounge. Some looked away. Others didn't bother to hide their smirks. "This isn't valet," the manager sneered. "You don't belong near a $500,000 vehicle." He turned and walked off, satisfied with himself. What he didn't know was that the man he just humiliated was the one who signed his paycheck. The glass doors of Hainstown Prestige Motors slid open quietly that morning, letting in a thin blade of October sunlight. The luxury showroom gleamed under cool, blue lighting, its polished marble floors reflecting the soft curves of Bentleys, Aston Martins, and Rolls-Royces. It was the kind of place where everything smelled like money. Leather, espresso, and quiet power. A man in a gray dress shirt stepped in, carrying nothing but a folded notebook and the silent weight of purpose. His name tag read simply, Maurice, sales trainee. To most, he looked like a new hire, maybe someone fresh out of a community college program, hoping to get a shot in the world of high-end car sales. But the truth, the man in the gray shirt had once stood on the cover of Vision Motors Quarterly. He'd graduated top of his class from Wharton. He'd been invited into boardrooms where decisions worth billions were made in a single breath. His real name was Maurice Langley, and 3 months ago, his private investment firm acquired majority ownership of the entire Hainstown dealership chain. No one in this building knew that, and that was the point. He wasn't here as a CEO. He was here to see how people like him, black men without visible power, were treated in spaces like this. Not as executives, not as clients, but as employees, as salesmen, as the ones who weren't supposed to belong. The night before he arrived, he sat with his father, once a small business owner, now quietly retired and battling the early fog of memory loss. They sat on the porch, the moonlight brushing against the old man's lined face. "You've built an empire," his father said, voice low and rough. "You've earned every bit of it. But son, you've only seen power from the top. You've never seen where the pain lives." Maurice had looked away. "So what are you saying, Dad?" "I'm saying, if you want to change something real, you have to walk where the silence is. Go down there, but not as their boss, as one of them." And so the plan was set. No executive privileges, no private driver, no special introductions, just an alias, a cheap name badge, and a backstory that said he was transferred from a third-party staffing agency. For 2 weeks, he'd train as a junior sales associate at the Denver Heights location, one of the flashiest showrooms in the entire state, and also the one with the most complaints about racial bias and toxic workplace behavior. Hede observe, listen, ble. The showroom had no idea who just walked through their doors. Not the manager who would soon berate him in public. Not the customers who would ignore him for being not quite their type. And certainly not the colleagues who'd smile politely, then rear out leads to someone else. He had left behind his title, his penthouse office, even his name, all to find out one thing: what really happens when a black man steps onto a luxury sales floor with no power to protect him. Maurice stood quietly at the edge of the showroom floor, clipboard in hand, shoes polished to a mirror shine. The morning rush hadn't begun yet, but the air already buzzed with a kind of tension he knew too well. Not loud, not obvious, but humming beneath the surface like static before a storm. He glanced around. The sales consultants, mostly white, moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Rachel, the redhead from the front desk, gave him a brief nod as she passed but didn't slow down. "Just stay out of the way." Someone muttered near the espresso machine. He didn't catch who. He didn't need to. His assigned mentor for the day was Todd, a mid-30s guy with slicked-back hair, brown loafers with no socks, and a confidence that hung off him like expensive cologne. "I'm not gonna lie, man," Todd said, clapping him on the shoulder with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "These clients, they know what they want. You don't want to be too eager. Just let them come to you, all right? Read the room. Maurice nodded. But reading the room here wasn't about sensing needs or understanding personalities. It was about assessing who looked like money and who didn't. Todd's eyes followed the door constantly, sizing up shoes, wristwatches, handbags. When a young black couple walked in holding hands, clearly excited, Todd turned away before they could make eye contact. Probably just browsing. He mumbled, "Let Rachel handle them." Maurice stepped forward. "I'll take it." Todd chuckled. "Sure, just don't waste your time." He approached the couple with warmth and professionalism, walking them through features of the Aston Martin DBX. The man asked sharp questions. The woman knew the model's exact trim packages. They'd clearly done their homework. When Maurice offered to run some numbers, the man smiled. "Actually, we're ready to buy. We just needed someone who would take us seriously." Todd, who'd been eavesdropping from across the floor, blinked. Maurice walked them over to Rachel's desk for paperwork. As he returned, a woman in designer sunglasses brushed past him and whispered loudly to her husband, "I thought this place only hired professionals." The husband gave Maurice a quick once-over, then looked away. It didn't stop there. By midday, Maurice had been passed over twice for incoming clients, both times redirected by Greg, the general manager. "Let someone with experience handle this one," he'd said. No eye contact, no explanation, just a voice that sliced through status like a scalpel. At lunch, the team gathered around a marble bar in the lounge. Conversations floated about vacations, crypto investments, fantasy football. Maurice sat quietly at the edge, stirring a cup of coffee no one offered him. Rachel finally leaned over and said, "Don't take it personal. It's just how things are around here. You'll get used to it." He didn't answer, because deep down he wasn't here to get used to anything. That afternoon, a new lead walked in, Elias Brooks, late 50s, sharp blazer, relaxed but intentional in every movement. Maurice greeted him first, shook his hand firmly, offered water. Elias was friendly, even inquisitive. They talked about Aston Martin's build specs, road feel. It was going well until Greg swooped in like a hawk. "Mr. Brooks," he boomed, cutting between them with a showman's grin. "Let me introduce you to Rachel, one of our best. She'll take it from here." Elias looked puzzled. "I was already working with Maurice." Greg kept smiling. "Of course, but Rachel can." "No." Elias interrupted politely. "I think I'll stick with the gentleman who treated me like a customer." Greg's face froze, just for a moment. Then he forced a laugh, clapped Maurice on the back, and walked off. The win was small, but it mattered. Maurice stood there afterward, watching Elias finish the paperwork. And for the first time that day, someone on the team looked at him with something other than indifference. Rachel. Her glance held curiosity now, maybe even a hint of respect. Still, the message was clear. You can be good. You can be better. But if you don't fit the mold, if your skin tone doesn't match the decor, they'll find a way to remind you. You're only here because they allow it. And that, Maurice knew, was the real engine behind places like this. Not just sales and specs, but control. The illusion of exclusivity. The curated, coded way in which privilege was extended or denied. He had only been here a day, but already the cracks were showing. By day 3, Maurice understood something most outsiders never would. Selling luxury cars wasn't about the cars. It was about the game, the quiet performance of wealth, the illusion of effortlessness, the choreography of posture, language, scent, and silence. It wasn't about torque or leather quality. It was about belonging and making sure everyone else knew if you didn't. The showroom had its own social rules, spoken in smiles and sidelong glances. Rachel could make a client feel like they'd arrived at a private club. Todd would shake hands with a man in a tailored suit while completely ignoring the woman beside him. Gregory, the general manager, had a knack for appearing beside anyone who looked like they owned a yacht, while vanishing when someone came in wearing sneakers. And then there was Maurice, who quickly learned that his very presence unsettled the rhythm of the place. When he greeted customers, he often saw that brief flicker of hesitation, that moment where their eyes registered his face, then darted to his name tag. then scanned the room to see if someone more fitting would approach instead. One woman nodded at him dismissively and asked if someone in finance could assist. A man in a powder blue blazer laughed when Maurice offered him a test drive and said, "I was hoping for someone who knows what these cars feel like on the road." "You know?" Maurice smiled through it. "Always, because he wasn't here to react, he was here to see." The deeper he stepped into their world, the more he noticed its fault lines. There were tears even among employees. Rachel and Todd were on the inside, invited to after-work drinks, looped in on special leads. The two Hispanic service techs were barely acknowledged in the break room. And Maurice? He existed in a liminal space, visible but not present, spoken to, but rarely spoken with. Every morning he showed up 30 minutes early, cleaned the area around the espresso machine, memorized the spec sheets, polished display handles that weren't his job. No one noticed, or if they did, they never said. Gregory once walked by while Maurice was laying out brochures near the Bentley. "You're a tidy one," he said with a chuckle. "Reminds me of my housekeeper." Maurice didn't flinch. He just smiled. It wasn't the first time someone had slipped in a remark like that. It wouldn't be the last. These weren't overt slurs, they were calibrated, socially acceptable darts. Microaggressions dressed in politeness. Casual erasures of worth. Still, there were moments. Small flickers of something more. Rachel had started lingering near his desk after client calls. "You're different," she said one afternoon. "You don't talk like someone new to this." He shrugged. "I've read a lot of brochures." She laughed, but her eyes didn't leave his face. "No, I mean, you sound like someone who's used to being in charge." The silence stretched. Maurice looked back down at his paperwork. Used to be. Maybe. The next day she brought him coffee. Just one. No announcement. No agenda. And he knew. Someone was watching. Noticing. Cracks in the wall spreading. Later that week, they hosted a private viewing event. Wine, classical music, exclusive client invitations. Maurice was assigned valet duty. He watched as guests stepped out of six-figure vehicles and had their keys plucked from their hands without a glance. More than once, someone mistook him for security. During the event, he overheard Gregory boasting about cleaning up the team and bringing in more faces that fit the brand. Rachel, standing just behind him, visibly stiffened. Their eyes met. No words exchanged, but something shifted. Maurice wasn't sure if it was sympathy, or anger, or guilt, maybe all of it. That night, as he left through the back entrance, he paused at the glass wall and looked inside. The showroom sparkled under its soft LED glow. A white Rolls-Royce sat dead center, bathed in light like an idol. People mingled, laughed, sipped their curated wines. But Maurice saw it now clearer than ever. This wasn't a place that sold luxury. This was a place that assigned it, that decided who could have it, who could touch it, and who must remain forever on the other side of the glass. Smiling, serving, never seen, he turned away from the glow. Tomorrow he would stop observing. Tomorrow he'd start pressing back. By the start of the second week, the gloves were off. Maurice no longer hung back in the shadows. He spoke up during morning briefings. He offered to take leads. He started making eye contact longer, standing straighter, interrupting politely when customers were diverted away from him. It was subtle, professional, but unmistakable, and the system pushed back. Gregory, once vaguely dismissive, became overtly territorial. He rerouted Maurice's assigned appointments to other consultants, claiming they were higher priority clients. On 2 occasions, Maurice's log sales leads were mysteriously reassigned in the database. When he asked Todd about it, he just raised an eyebrow and said, "Must have been a glitch. Don't sweat it." But Maurice did sweat it, because now it wasn't just slights and whispers. It was impact. It was money. Every consultant at Haineston worked partly on commission. Every missed sale was money redirected, and the numbers didn't lie. By Friday, Rachel had closed 3 deals. Todd had 2. Maurice, 0. Despite doing every test drive, running every credit app, staying late to clean up brochures no one else would touch, Then came the moment that burned. A new client arrived. A tech entrepreneur from Boulder, mid-40s, Birkenstocks, Tesla keys in hand, clearly looking for his next indulgence. Maurice greeted him with the usual calm, led him toward the Bentley display, and began his pitch. The man was engaged, curious, comfortable. Then Gregory stepped in. Michael, what a surprise. His voice oozed charm as he glided over, placing a firm hand on the client's back. Let me show you our exclusive options. Rachel, can you join us? Maurice stood frozen as the three of them walked away. The client glanced back once, eyebrows furrowed, but didn't stop. That evening, Maurice stayed after closing. Alone in the customer lounge, he stared at the quiet reflection of himself in the espresso machine's chrome surface, the polished smile, the neat shirt, the name tag that no longer felt like armor but a shackle. He remembered a phrase his father used to say, "Sometimes the weight isn't what they put on you, it's what they refuse to take off." He was starting to feel that weight in his bones. But something else shifted that night. Rachel returned, after everyone had left. She stood at the doorway for a moment, watching him. "I saw what happened," she said. Maurice didn't turn around. "It's fine." "No, it's not. And I think you know that better than any of us." He finally looked at her. "You know what I've noticed," he said quietly. "The glass here is so clean, you start to think there's nothing dividing you, until you reach out and feel the wall." Rachel didn't respond. Instead, she walked over, set down a slim folder on the counter, and slid it toward him. "Client file," she said. "Michael from Boulder. He asked for your card before he left. Said you were the only one who treated him like a human being." Maurice opened the folder. Inside, handwritten notes, highlighted preferences, even a down payment form. He looked up. "Why are you giving this to me?" Rachel hesitated, then said, almost to herself, "Because I think I'm tired of watching the wrong people win." She left without another word. The next morning, Maurice showed up early, earlier than usual. He stood alone in the showroom, the only sound a soft hum from the ceiling lights. He walked past the Rolls-Royce, past the Aston Martin, past the coffee bar where so many judgments were made behind polite laughs, and he stood in front of the whiteboard that listed weekly sales goals. 3 names on top: Rachel, Todd, Gregory. His name wasn't even there. He picked up a marker, drew a single box beneath them. Then, in careful print, he wrote, "Let's see what happens when the rules change." That day, he took control of his leads. He challenged the reroutes. He politely refused to hand off clients. And when Gregory asked to see him in the office, Maurice agreed calmly, deliberately. In that meeting, Gregory didn't mince words. "You're not fitting in here, Maurice," he said. "You're disruptive. Clients don't come here for politics or guilt trips. They come for consistency, for class." Maurice stared back. "Is that what you call it?" Greg leaned forward. "I'm trying to help you. This environment, these people, they respond to a certain image. You'd understand that if you'd been in this business long enough." Maurice's jaw tightened. He wanted to laugh, or shout, or tear down the walls one glass panel at a time, but instead he smiled. "I have been in this business," he said softly, "longer than you know." Then he stood, straightened his shirt, and walked out of the office. That night he called someone from his firm, not to expose the dealership, not yet, but to prepare, because what was coming next wasn't about blending in. It was about revealing the truth and making sure no one could look away. The following Monday, everything looked the same on the surface. Same polished marble floors, same low murmur of morning chatter, same scent of espresso curling through the air, but there was a tension just beneath it now, quiet, coiled, like a string pulled too tight. Maurice had come in early again, this time dressed not in the gray shirt and black slacks of a sales trainee, but in a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, no name tag, just a small silver pin on his lapel. Rachel noticed first. Her eyes widened slightly as he stepped onto the floor. Posture straighter, gait deliberate. She opened her mouth to speak but paused. She didn't understand yet. Not fully, but she knew. Todd gave him a once-over and snorted. "What's with the get-up? You interviewing somewhere?" Maurice didn't answer. Gregory entered from the side hallway, phone in one hand, latte in the other, barking about some delayed shipment from Italy. He stopped mid-sentence when he spotted Maurice. A long, still silence. Then, "Is there a reason you're not in uniform, Maurice?" "Yes," Maurice said calmly. "I'm not here as a trainee today." Gregory blinked. "I don't follow." "You will," Maurice replied. Before anyone could say more, the showroom doors opened again. This time, not a customer, but 3 individuals in dark suits walked in. 2 men and 1 woman. Professional. Precise. One held a sleek leather portfolio. Another carried a small digital camera. "Sorry, who are?" Todd began. The lead man smiled. "Good morning. We're from Orion Horizon Partners. We have a 10 o'clock appointment with your general manager." Gregory's face twitched. "I wasn't told. You were—" The woman interrupted, flipping open the portfolio. "Email confirmation was sent last Thursday. You're overdue for your second quarter compliance audit." This branch was flagged. Gregory looked rattled now. "Flagged? For what?" The man stepped aside. Maurice took 1 step forward. "For ethics," he said, "and equity." The room went still. You could hear the espresso machine hiss in the corner. What is this?" Greg demanded, voice rising. Maurice turned slightly, addressing the room. Not just Greg, but Rachel, Todd, the techs watching from behind the glass. "My name is Maurice Langley," he said. "I'm the CEO of Orion Horizon Partners. 3 months ago, we acquired a controlling interest in Haynes-Ton Prestige Motors." He let the silence settle. "I've spent the past 2 weeks here under a different name, observing, listening, measuring not just performance but culture, attitudes, practices." Rachel sat down slowly. Todd's mouth was open. Gregory stepped forward, face red now. This is outrageous. You deceived us. You infiltrated this place under false pretenses." That's leadership," Maurice said, voice still calm. "Real leadership doesn't sit behind glass. It steps onto the floor. And what I found here," he turned to the Orion team, "needs to be addressed. Immediately." The woman in the audit team nodded. "We've documented sales discrepancies, customer redirections, employee bias complaints that were never followed up on." Maurice's tone sharpened just slightly. "And I've personally experienced racial gatekeeping, intentionally rerouted leads. Disrespect not just to me but to other clients and staff. You built a system here, Gregory, and you made sure it rewarded only the familiar." Gregory looked around, eyes darting. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. We've always—" "Rachel, tell them. We've treated people." Rachel stood. She didn't look at him. "I think you should stop talking," she said quietly. Maurice turned to her. "Thank you for the folder. For not looking away." She nodded, blinking hard. Gregory laughed nervously. "You're not seriously considering what? Letting him fire me? This is my showroom. I built this team." "No," Maurice said. "You built a mirror of yourself." He paused. "And it reflects poorly." A beat passed. Then he stepped aside, gesturing to the audit team. "Please escort Mr. Haynes to his office. Retrieve his company property. We'll handle the transition paperwork internally." The 2 men flanked Gregory. He protested, loudly, then more quietly, then not at all. Within minutes, he was gone. Maurice turned to the team still watching. Faces stunned, silent. "Let me be clear," he said. "No one here is being fired today, unless they choose to keep being the version of themselves that allowed this to continue." He let that sit. "We can build something better, but it starts now, with honesty, with decency, with merit." He looked to the side window where sunlight now poured in. "For 2 weeks I stood behind glass. Today, I ask you to join me on the other side." No one moved for a moment. Then Rachel stepped forward, and one by one the others followed. The next morning, the showroom was quieter. There was no espresso hum, no confident chatter bouncing off marble, no Gregory, just silence, soft and waiting. Maurice arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, this time not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as himself. He stood in the center of the showroom, no spotlight, no music, just natural morning light filtering through the glass, casting long reflections over the polished floors. The staff slowly gathered, unsure what to expect. Rachel stood near the back. Todd leaned awkwardly by the Bentley. Even the two technicians emerged from behind the service bay, wiping their hands on rags, watching. Maurice looked around, then began. "I know some of you are confused," he said calmly. "Some are angry. Some are maybe even embarrassed." He let that breathe. "What I did wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a setup. It was a mirror. And I stood in front of it, not to judge you, but to see what was being reflected." He paused, turning slowly as he spoke. "This dealership is built on beauty, elegance, precision, but none of those things mean anything if they're only extended to a few. A luxury experience isn't truly luxurious if it's built on exclusion." No one interrupted, not even Todd. "I came here as a man with no name, no title, and I watched how quickly people assessed my value based on everything but my work." He glanced toward Rachel. "But I also saw flickers of courage, of decency, of change." She lowered her eyes, blinking fast. "So here's what's going to happen." He stepped forward. "We're restructuring the culture here. Training will be mandatory for everyone. Implicit bias, equity, communication, not just to check a box, but to open eyes." Someone shifted in the back. "We're reevaluating hiring practices, lead distribution, performance metrics. From today forward, promotions won't be about who fits the image, but who earns it." Now people were listening, but most importantly, he raised his voice slightly, not angry, just resolute. "We're not selling cars anymore." A beat, then a smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. "We're selling trust." A ripple of surprise, a few soft exhales, and somewhere in the back, a quiet, unexpected clap. It grew, one by one, until the showroom, once built on polished perfection and cold impressions, filled with the sound of something real. Maurice looked out at them, not as a judge, not as a CEO behind glass, but as a man who had stood in their shoes. "Because trust," he said, voice softening, "is the only luxury that matters when the world turns its back on you." He turned toward the door, where a new day awaited, but just before he stepped out, a voice called behind him. It was Rachel. "What do we call you now?" she asked gently. Maurice paused, then turned back with a smile. "Just Maurice," he said. "That's always been enough." And with that, he walked into the light, leaving behind not just a changed showroom, but a challenge that echoed through every polished surface, still reflecting who they used to be and who they could now become.